Okay, so here's a test of the first video I'm going to make. We got VM Player and we got VirtualBox. We go ahead and try to see which one works the best. Generally, VM Player it works the best with pretty much any kind of hardware configuration, even Wi-Fi. I have issues with VirtualBox detecting the drivers for Wi-Fi, so pretty much you're better off with VM Player if you have hardware issues. Oracle just seems to not be working. Even after installing the guest editions, extension packs, everything like that. So let's go ahead and see what it takes to make a virtual machine here on VirtualBox. We're gonna go ahead. We're gonna make a Linux one. If you type Linux, you notice it goes ahead and fills it in. It lets you automatically select Linux. You don't have to go through that little menu. We're gonna go with Ubuntu 64-bit because the Mint runs on Ubuntu. So let's go ahead and select that. We're going to be using Mint 17. You can give this pretty much as you can all the way up to the green. Linux doesn't need that much, that's why it's 512, whereas Windows generally runs at 2 gigabytes. So let's go ahead and click next at 2 just to see how the comparison runs. We're going to create a virtual hard drive now. What this does is pretty much just allows you to go ahead and create a virtual hard drive to run your machine to install your OS onto. If we do a fixed size, that limits us on how much we're actually gonna use up. I already have a folder that's created, so let's make this 20 gigabytes, and then we're gonna go ahead and make sure that it took. We'll go ahead, we'll click here. It's going to my virtual VMs. You can save this pretty much anywhere. Recommend on the C drive if you actually have the room for it. If you don't, that's fine. Put it on a secondary drive. Even external drive works. But go ahead and we'll save this VM. We'll go ahead and create it. Now is where we get into the waiting game. This seems to take a little bit of time, depending on how big you've made that. It's loading drivers, creating everything that you need to basically have a virtual hard drive on your physical hard drive. It's completely separate. Separates the sectors, which pretty much allows it to stay completely separate from the hard disk. If you'd selected dynamics for the guys that want to go ahead and expand on whatever it is they start with, say start with 10, 12 gigs. As you add things, install programs, it goes ahead and automatically senses that. It stretches out as big as it needs to go. I don't recommend doing that if you're limited and have a finite amount of space on your actual C drive. So let's finish this up. Alright. Now it gives you generic stuff to basically get it started, but what we're going to do is we're going to click settings, and either you can click it there or you can right click settings. It brings you to the same place. Alright, this has already been selected for you. Your advanced, I don't recommend really going through this too much. Description, any of that stuff you're not really required to do. So you've already set this up when you initially set it up. Our booting order, don't really need the floppy. I don't really use that. This USB tablet, that's fine. It goes ahead and it gives you defaults. So I recommend just not changing any of this stuff. On your processor, you can give this as much as you can in the green. Just remember your host operating system, your Windows, actually needs memory to run in the background while you're running this machine. So only put that as far as the green goes. With VM Player, you don't have these safety features, so you have to be really careful to see what your computer can actually do before you do anything past that. We don't need to set anything else up. You can run this all the way up to the green. It's no big deal. You can actually use much of your video card as you need to there. 3D acceleration, sometimes you need this. If you're going to try to run Wi-Fi, I've never got this to work. I've even installed the Wi-Fi drivers on the virtual machine. It still does not detect the Wi-Fi. I recommend going ahead, hard plugging it in, hard wiring it. That way your actual video and everything syncs up nicely. Your internet connections is the best it's going to get. Just use that 3D acceleration, no need for the 2D. With this, again, you don't need these options. Just showing you what they look like. With storage, okay, now is when you're going to go here. You've got your empty CD slot that it created, and here's where your virtual disk drive is down here. In your CD, you're going to go into choose a virtual CD DVD. On mine, I keep mine on separate drive here. And you go into DVD images, and then here's another copy of Linux, but I don't want to use that one. I want to use 17, which is the newest version. And then that's all you have to do. It's inserted. It's an ISO file. Just treat it like it's any other ISO file. It goes ahead and it mounts it, does everything that you need it to. You run it as a live CD since it is Linux, but I don't recommend doing that if you're going to go ahead and install it. You've already sectioned off your hard drive space that you need. So you have that 20 gigabytes already set aside. No need for the live CD. You can still try it as a live CD, even though that option's there. It still inserts until you fully install it. Your audio settings should default to whatever you need. Now here's where you need to pay attention. NAT is selected by default. That's network address translation. That'll basically go ahead and give you an IP address through your host adapter, which is the one that you have your hardwire plugged into. You can use bridge adapter. That's pretty much the same thing. You're going to do internal network. That prevents your virtual machine, from actually using the internet. It will not connect until you go back in and change this adapter later. Now you can go through several options of adding 4 adapters. It's all virtual. It's just going to show up as more on your host machine. So you're going to start seeing all these little VirtualBox extra adapters that you've never actually installed, but it's because this install that it's adding along there, it thinks it's connected to a machine. Advanced, again, I've tried all these settings. These will only be if you're trying to get something else to work. Use just the defaults. And you want the cable connected. That's there by default. So that's pretty much telling you, hey, the cable's connected. It's pretty much like you physically plugging it in, except virtually. Your MAC address, you don't need to change that. You can give it whatever MAC address you want, but anyway you look at it, the outside world sees your IP address coming out of your computer to the net. So changing that's not really going to do you any good, unless you're trying to do some serious stuff with it. You don't need serial ports. Your USB is enabled automatically, and you can actually add devices. These are all the ones I have right now. I have my phone hooked up. That's my Motorola. I got the generic USB, which is pretty standard, but it's already plugged in. It detects pretty well. So this is shared folders. Shared folders, you can go into add a folder. You can pretty much choose wherever other, and then take it to your C drive, your D drive, external drive, wherever it is you want it, and pretty much create a folder to where you can put it in on your host machine and view it in your VirtualBox. That's where if you wanted to add external drivers without the ability to go into the internet, you'd have to do that. You'd have to drop it in that shared folder. It kind of gives you the look and feel of sharing on an actual system. Go ahead and click OK. Now we've got everything set up. We're going to go ahead and start this machine. The machine's going to boot up in a separate little window. You have options for full screen or scaled mode. Your full screen, obviously, that gives you full screen. And don't worry, your menu's still down here at the bottom. You can go back to view. You can do scaled mode, which that pretty much you can maximize it however you want to. Later, once you insert the guest editions, DVD and CD and everything, it installs and gives you a little more options because it integrates better with your video card. Now we're actually walking through the process of the Linux Mint 17 setup. This has some issues. It's on the trial version, beta edition, if you will. Once you get it going, sometimes you have to restart it a couple times. Once you fully installed it, get the updates done, everything like that works fine. Again, like I said, this is running like a live CD, so it's not installed, it's running already, it's up and going. Here's your install disk. If you want to fully install this to your virtual drive, you go ahead and click install on it. But as I said, you got your live CD already going. You have access to everything that's already set up. Your settings, again, you can go in and pretty much change anything. Your display settings, right now that's just its defaults. When you fully install it, you can actually get every driver that you need. We'll go ahead and go through the process. If you don't have the drivers, then it pretty much won't give you full functionality. Here's your limits. You need 8.6 gigabytes. It's not that big. Like I said, you could start small and use dynamic and work it up to a larger size drive. No need in that though. I just use 20 as a pretty standard number. And it's plugged into a power source. It's recommended because it puts your computer in a better state to actually run and do um, processes. When you deal with that, you're better off with the internet connected um, and high performance set if you got it. If not, that's fine. You know, laptops like mine, I use high performance all the time. It all just depends on your battery state. So if you don't have it plugged in, I recommend the lower performance. You're going to kill your battery trying to do this. I click continue. You can go ahead and leave this default option, erase the disk. There's nothing on it. It's a virtual drive. All it has is typical drivers. There's nothing actually installed yet. So you can just go ahead and click install now. With these other options, you don't really need these unless you're going in and changing some stuff around. And let's just not get into that right now. Go ahead and click install now. It's going to run through a little setup menu. You can minimize this all you want to. Go through and look at things while it's installing. There's just your basic steps. It's already selected default English. You can type your name, user 1, doesn't matter what your name is. Type your password, whatever you want your password to be. Make it 1. That's what I'm making it 1, doesn't matter. To avoid this in Linux causing issues, just keep something simple so you don't forget what it is. You're going to use this often. Linux is a higher security system. It uses passwords for everything. Go ahead and pick a simple thing that you can remember. It doesn't have to be one. It's a virtual machine. If you have it set to internal network, nobody really has access to it anyway. But if you want to do the updates, go ahead, leave the bridge or the NAT selected, and you'll have internet. If you've already done that, you set it up. Now, you choose login automatically. That saves you at least one time you're having to put the password in. You have these other options, require my password to log in, which means it pretty much boots up like Windows. It picks, your user, you type your username, then you go in and you enter your password and it logs in. You can encrypt your home folder. You can do lots of things with Linux you can't do with Windows necessarily as easily. Okay, now it's going to finish copying all the files. Remember, it's only as fast as I give it, so I gave it 4 processors, which are half of the 8 that I have. I gave it only 2 gigabytes of RAM, so that's all that it's virtually running with on my physical system. Shouldn't take too long though. Linux isn't a very large install. You go through and look at these while you're kind of learning the operating system. You notice there's no close window yet. That won't let you close because it's installing. They're smarter than Windows. If you hit X on Windows, generally it'll ask you if you want to close it. It's doing an install. If you said yes, then you're dumb. This prevents that. Maybe for your more intelligent user anyways. But again, you have all these options you can go through, again, reread. And in fact, you really don't even need to do that. You can minimize that. It's still got the install going here. You can go into any other settings that you want to use. If you have a slower machine, I recommend just kind of letting it finish so that it's not actually eating up all your resources as time to finish. Again, like I said, I went ahead and it has internet access. That's recommended for the install. It goes ahead and gets whatever packs of software that you need, updates. Have a fairly fast connection, so it shouldn't take too long. But again, that's your host operating system and your host internet connection working. So if it's not any good, your computer is slow, it's going to take a little bit longer. But hitting the skip button doesn't really do much. You can kind of see what it's doing when it's downloading these files. This will look like a command prompt to you. Not big on terminal, still learning terminal. But as far as this goes, I mean, it's just kind of a brief look at how it's running, what and all it's doing, and the time it takes. We're almost there on the 26.1 megabytes, it seems. Okay, should be finishing up here pretty quickly. And there we go. It's done with that bit. Now it's going to move on to the next. And this will just keep running for a couple minutes until it gets all the updates done. Linux isn't like Windows either, where when you have to deal with, say you have some hardware plugged in that's not typical to your install when you first got the computer, and it doesn't know what to do with it. The drivers don't work right, and Windows says, "Well, we don't know what to do. Give us the drivers." You try to find it on the internet fails, because that seems to be a broken thing in all Windows. It's never worked 100% for me every time. With Linux, I have no issues with that. It's already connected to the internet. It's using their database. They're pulling all their drivers. All their drivers go ahead and automatically detect your hardware, install everything. You're not fully up to date right away. There are some other updates you're going to have to go do if you do fully update everything. So you have to go into your software manager and actually find everything. Just finishing up. I believe this is almost done. If you look at your progress bar, that's fairly accurate to where it finishes. It's no timer or anything, so just be patient if you have a slower machine. Well, let's go ahead and, while this is finishing up, let's go ahead and go through some of these. You got your typical text editors and calculators. Here's your terminal. I'm curious what that looks like. It's opaque. You can actually see through quite a bit, so it's pretty translucent. But you know, again, oh, okay, we're already done with our install, so we'll just continue testing for just a second till we close this terminal. Okay, you can type your get apt, you know, whatever it is that you're trying to do. There's a bunch of commands that are still new to me. Started learning those. We'll go over that in another time once I've got a handle on it. You now have your 19 gigabyte volume out of the 20 that you put together with your install. This is pretty much null and void at this point. It's done. Let's go ahead. You can go here, your power options, or there are other ways to go through this, just like there are on Windows. We'll go ahead and do a restart. And that code typically doesn't show on other versions. Again, sometimes this takes 2 or 3 restarts on the machine. It says to remove the installation media, close the tray, hit enter. VirtualBox isn't necessarily the same as your physical media because it kind of works around the fact that there's a disk already in there. As far as ejecting it, there are options on your virtual machine that you'll have to look at to make that work. Okay, now it's done. You can go ahead and undo this or leave it if you want to. It's your welcome screen, just like Windows would do for you. You got your guides to go through all these things. Here's your software manager. That's pretty important to know where that's at. Again, you open anything in here, it practically wants a password for everything. So go ahead, enter your password. Your software manager comes up. If you're going to do updates, I'm not 100% on the full update process. We can pretty much go in here once it's loaded. You can go ahead and you can change all these options and things in here. You can do your system tools, internet, sound, video, whatever. I went to this because this is what typical users of Linux have to use to run Windows programs. So it's kind of like us running a VirtualBox inside of Windows, or inside of Linux rather, for Windows environment things. So again, you know, still working on this myself. Forget exactly how to do all the updates. I'll go over that again later. But yeah, that should finish it up for this video. And hopefully you now know how to set that up inside VirtualBox. We'll go ahead, we'll do the VM player setup. You can go ahead and save the machine state. Doesn't matter, you can shut it down, do whatever. The machine state saves it as is. Right now we start it back up again, it looks exactly the same. If you notice, there's a screen capture over here. It's called snapshots. Snapshots are VirtualBox specific. There's a different name for it in VM player, but it basically takes little captures of what the system state was like. So you can restore it to a certain point. You install something doesn't work, you go back and click your snapshots. You find whatever snapshots, you can create them as you're going inside the program. Then you go back and find that snapshot that was just before you screwed it up. Restore it, you're done, and then end of story. You figure out what you did wrong. With this, here's VM player. It's non-commercial use only. I'd enter my password, or I'd rather enter my email with no password or anything. It just asks for a valid email. Unless you pay for the pay version, then it'll ask you for a serial. You have both options when you first start this. But just enter your valid email. It doesn't matter which email you use. We're going to go ahead, we'll create a new virtual machine. And then this looks slightly different. If you notice, it goes ahead and asks you for an install disk. Well, we're going to go ahead and we're going to browse to the same spot that we found that other one. It's going to be on our F drive. I'm going to go down here to this, do the images, and we're going to use the same file. It's pretty much like using the same disk over and over. It can't detect the operating system right away. But once you go ahead and go to the next menu, see it allows you to select Linux. Again, Ubuntu is your option that you should select for this particular flavor of Linux. It's Mint. Let's go ahead and pick the 64-bit version because that's the disk that I selected. You can use the 32-bit version if you only have a 32-bit processor in your host machine. Which you definitely need to make sure you know which one you're installing. Again, this is going to put this in my C drive under Documents and Virtual Machines. I'm going to make this the smallest I can get it, so just 9 gigs because I don't have a ton of space on my C drive. So actually, let's go ahead and make this 10. And if you read this, if you store it as a single file, the difference is when you split the disk, makes it easier to move the virtual machine to another computer, but may reduce performance with a very large disk. This is a small disk, not that big, so you can just keep this, split it into multiple files. If you ever decide to move it, it's no big deal. We won't lose information that way. It's more reliable. Single file, it really doesn't matter. It's up to you however you're doing the install. If you're using a smaller drive like I am, it shouldn't matter. Select multiple disks, and then again, this is just generic. It's already assigned a gigabyte of memory. It's got the NAT driver, it's got your USB controller, printer, sound card, CD, DVD, excuse me, all the stuff you need. But if you really want to get to the nitty gritty, again, this gives you some guidelines, but if you go up to this 8, that's just going to be dumb because I only have 8. You can't run this host operating system at the same time you're given this 8 gigabytes. It will crash, it will have problems. So your machine will just completely reboot. Do not go above, half of the physical memory you have. If you got 6 gigs, use 3 max. If you have 8 gigs, use 4 max. Just use the basics of common sense on this. Make sure you're not actually going and exceeding that. So recommended is only a gig. So like I used 2 for the other one. We'll go ahead and make it 2 just to see how the difference performs here. Processors, again, you gotta be really careful. The other one gave you a warning. This one does not. You have to be careful. So you can select 4 because the last one 4 was good because it gave me 8 logical processors. The preferred mode, you don't really need to change any of this. Automatic's fine. And again, you can virtualize pretty much anything with this compared to VirtualBox Manager, because when you're dealing with VM Player, it tends to work better with the physical hardware of more computers. So, you don't need the CPU performance counters. That's more for if you're running, say, like a server, or you want to see how it's performing. It gives you a way to actually keep track of that. We already selected this, so there's no point in really going back through and choosing a different disk. Uh, the device, obviously it's a CD, DVD. It should connect at power on. That's defaulted, just like in our last one. It says cable connected, kind of like for the network adapter. And again, you have this option here on this, like I said, for the network adapter. See this one, again, more options. When you go into bridge mode, you can actually give this the replication of a physical network connection. So this is exactly like you go in, you set up however you want this to actually physically connect through the virtual network. It sounds crazy, but this allows you to go more in depth. It actually sees my wireless, whereas the last one, if you notice, the only option was a virtual box Ethernet adapter, and now it even picks that up because it's installed that. It even sees that as an adapter. But you don't need all this. You can just stick to your basic, one that you have. This is one from a VPN that I have, which is a totally different thing. VPN is virtual private network, kind of it hides your IP, but not for the reasons that you'd think. It pretty much makes you more anonymous on the web. That's a whole another thing in itself. But anyway, it sees every adapter that I've got installed. So that's a big benefit of this over the VirtualBox Manager. And you don't need to choose any of these other ones. No point in going into further detail. USB controller, you can even set that to 3. I have USB 3. It says using USB devices with a USB 3 controller requires Linux kernel 3.2. So make sure you have at least a minimum of that. I'm pretty sure that this kernel is higher than that. The only way to check is actually check the disk before you download it, the ISO file. Sound card's generic, it connects at power on. If you don't want it to boot up and do all kinds of crazy things, you can have it disconnected so there's no noise to it whatsoever. Again, printer status, everything's automatically detected. This went ahead and accelerated the 3D graphics, which is the last one you have to choose between the 2D and the 3D as separate options. Kind of know what you're doing. And this says guest memory for graphics. Well, I have quite a bit on my video card, but it's recommended at 768. This isn't actually using your video card itself, it's using the virtual memory. So let's go ahead, we can look at this if we want to, in adding some other type of hardware. You can add pretty much anything from a floppy, another network adapter, anything you really want to on here. There's no serial ports on this computer, it didn't go ahead and add one. There's no parallel, that's old printer type stuff. There's just things that aren't on my computer that I didn't need to add, so it didn't even add it for me. But you can add those later if you need to. We'll close it, click finish, because we're pretty sure that's exactly what we're wanting to do. It's powered off. You notice it's got the RAM, shows you less options here unless you actually go into the settings. You can either click here and play, you can click up here and play. You can, I believe, choose open and then pick the one that you actually have saved in a file folder somewhere. But let's just go ahead and click play. And you don't want to see this message again unless you want to read that 1,000 times. It's just about the keyboard. It automatically takes control and kind of takes care of everything. It's kind of nice because this actually detected my computer and my Motorola phone connected to the computer. You can do a couple things with that if you really wanted to later, but no point now. So Linux is starting. I know, kind of the same with snapshots. I was mentioning earlier, with snapshots you can actually save the machine state where it's at. But with this, you can also go up here, you can hit pause, you can shut it down, restart it. This is your guest operating system. Remember that. This is the guest. Windows itself is the host. So when you think about that, then it makes sense. This is a guest and it's operating on the host. Remember that when you're doing your installs. You see, it gave you a generic floppy disk. No point in having that. But here is the Linux install. the exact same way that it looked on the other one. Works exactly the same install disk. It doesn't matter if we're offline currently. My internet connection probably just kicked me off. And click continue. Yeah, this has no effect immediately. Once it's reconnected and everything to the internet later, it'll update all the drivers and things that it needs. Right now, we're going with user 1 again. Same password, just 1. The number 1, that's it. Log in automatically. And now it's copying the files. We gave this the same everything except for the virtual hard drive space. This one is being installed on my C drive. It might run actually faster because it's a solid state drive. I installed the other one in a different folder on a separate drive, which is also internal to the computer, but it's a hybrid drive, so it's not full SSD. Solid states are great because they just move information so fast. The ISO file is located on the hybrid drive, so it's having to read from that drive and install to this other drive to the C. So that's where you might have performance issues if you have the files totally in different places than where you're actually saving the virtual disk. Recommend having them in the same spot if you can. If you're limited on space like me, then just do what you can with what you got. Make a small 10 gig drive and don't ever expand it any that we're using for this class. Okay, again, your install is just gonna look just like it did last time. I'm gonna go ahead. We'll end this video. I'll let this finish out. You got this tools that popped up. I didn't show you on VirtualBox. You don't want to go ahead and do this, but see, it's got a guest operating system. It's virtually locking the CD-ROM tray because it has a current operation going from that disk. You don't want to disconnect that if it's in the middle of an install. It's going to screw up. But again, like I said, this is a guest editions DVD. It automatically tries to install for you. We don't want to do that. We'll go ahead and suspend the state. When I start it right back up, it's going to be exactly the same as it was. It's going to be the same state and everything. I just hit play. It plays right from where it just was. It won't lose any of the install information or anything. The last thing that I'm glad I just now caught myself forgetting, if you go back, start your machine back up with VirtualBox. Now this is the part where sometimes it takes a little bit longer depending on what you had going on previously, but it takes less time generally than starting up from scratch. Okay, so since this is running on VirtualBox, we need to get this out of the screen. So if you remember before, you might have saw it real quick, not paid attention, I didn't go over it. You hit Control D, I'm sorry, your right control. Bear with me here. Okay, so you automatically mounted this guest editions. Now as far as installing this, I had some issues with this myself. It goes ahead and brings out the exe files, got the run files. As far as I can tell, this doesn't or hasn't really done anything. It says once these files are out, then it's done. But I don't know if it even has run yet, so that's another question. But it's guest editions. It works better when you're installing Windows products. It just goes ahead and starts, the exe file runs. It installs these extra drivers that allows a more seamless transition between using this inside another operating system and say your shared folders or physical hardware. So it just gives you more drivers, more capability, and it's also nicer for your capture for your mouse. Sometimes machines have issues with going between this machine to that machine. I can minimize easily, close this if I even wanted to, and my machine is still running right here, no problems. Alright, well, hopefully this video comes out okay. Appreciate you watching it. If you're curious, my VPN here has all these options. I can connect like I'm in any of these other countries. It allows me to pretty much hide who I am online, so people can't track information, credit cards, purchases, anything like that. It's $40 a year. I've seen it advertised heavily on YouTube. It's great. Speeds up to 90 megabits per second for my connection. I'm paying for 50. It's not all the time, but it did get up to 90. I have proof. I got a screenshot of it. And that'll be it for this video. Appreciate it.